How's it going, everybody? I am ZBilbs, and I'm back here with another metal video. Now I'm finishing out my series of kind of end-of-the-year metal videos, and now I've talked about my favorite albums of the year, my favorite songs of the year, so now it's time to talk about what I didn't like so much from this year. And so now this one, I'm going to be going over my most disappointing metal albums of the year. Now, I don't actively go out of my way to listen to bad metal albums, so I can't really say, like, oh, these are the worst albums of the year. These are just albums I came in and I had some pretty high expectations for, and I was very soundly let down. These were not as good as I was hoping. I wouldn't say any of these are bad albums by any means, except for one of them. I'll tell you that when we get there. But they're definitely disappointing albums. Also, there's a handful of albums on here that I know that people absolutely love that just didn't stick with me. So just take everything with a grain of salt. Know that this is just personally just what impact it had on me, that it was personally disappointing. A lot of these probably are objectively good. But also there's no order to this list. I'm just going and saying all of these are disappointing. I'll be listing the reasons why. Starting off with my first disappointing album of the year, I have At the Heart of Winter Veil by Twilight Force. Now, obviously, for people who know my channel know that I absolutely love power metal, so when the year came to a close and I was kind of doing my due diligence of researching some of the best albums, a lot of that included, oh, what were the best power metal albums of the year? And so I looked into this one, because this one came up consistently. I've heard of Twilight Force, and I could not get through this album. It's just not my thing. I can tell there's definitely a lot of great passion and craftsmanship that's put into this. And even though I love power metal, it's just not my style of power metal. I guess that similar thing, there's a couple other power metal ones I'm going to talk about, but I couldn't get into those ones for different reasons. For this one, for me, power metal, although it's kind of the most light and breezy and easiest to digest style of metal, I still like a little bit of grit to my power metal. And I know I'm probably a hypocrite because I put Glory Hammer's album at number 10, but that one had, like, I can't even describe it. It wasn't quite as, like, light and Disney core-esque as this album is. There was it was very goofy and cheesy, but it wasn't so, like, Twinkle Town type thing that I couldn't get through it. That one, it was a fun cheesy. This one is just a cheesy. This one, there's like too much strings and too much of, like, the, I don't know, chimes and twinkly bells that it just didn't do anything for me at all. It ceased to be power metal and just ended up being just complete cheese. So although it's probably a good album for people who can get past that, I couldn't, and so it ended up being a disappointment. Moving on to another very highly rated power metal album that I really wanted to get into. Whereas I was like, Twilight Force, I was like, oh yeah, you know, the fact I didn't get into that, that's just personal preference. This one, like, I heard really good things about, and I originally, like, when I started listening to it, I was like, oh yeah, this is really solid. But yeah, let's just rip the Band-Aid off. Cycles of Pain by Angra. This one is consistently up there with one of the better power metal albums of the year. Angra's been around for a long time. I haven't really listened to any of their stuff. This is also an introduction to their band for me. And man, there's some really great musicianship on this album. This one, unlike Twilight Force, where I can't even tell if it's a good album or not because I just can't get into it at all. This one, I actually listened to it top to bottom, and there was good stuff in there. I couldn't quite put the pieces together of me liking it. There's a couple things that just held it back from me, like, actually being able to enjoy it. One of them was the vocals. The singer, although I think he's a good singer, he had these kind of, like, wavery moments in his vocals where he's like, oh, which was just really off-putting for me. It might be just like a I gotta get used to it type of thing, but it was really hard to get into his vocals on a lot of those like more like grandeur moments of grandeur when he's doing this like wavery thing in there. And then the other thing is that what I really love in a power metal chorus, and this is a similar criticism I have for the next album coming up. Power metal, like obviously I like a fun, fast-paced, great singing, great soaring harmonies and guitars. But I also like a really fun, catchy chorus, and this album did not really have any of those. There was some choruses, obviously, it had its choruses, but they were all like really forgettable. There was nothing that stuck with me, and I was like, oh yeah, I'm thinking about that song and with that about that chorus. I know it's probably a personal preference. A lot of people just enjoy the song just for the musicianship and the singing and the guitars and all that, and like chorus or not, like yeah, whatever. I didn't really like most of these choruses. I thought they were pretty basic. Also, a few times in the album, they tried to do, I know they're like a Brazilian band, so they tried to do like some more, I don't know, like not really metal stuff, like mix in some like, I don't know, folk influences or something like that, and those didn't really land for me either. So while I definitely can see why people love this album, it wasn't really my thing. So yeah, Cycles of Pain, also kind of a disappointment. Next up, I've got the last power metal album I'll be talking about, and this one was the most just frustrating, at least frustrating at myself personally for not being able to like it, and that is Towers of Gold by Sacred Outcry. Now, this album has been not only getting like universal acclaim in the power metal sphere, but it's been getting just universal acclaim in the metal sphere in general. And I can see why, because like when I listen to this album, even more than Angra and Twilight Force, this is an absolutely beautifully done album in terms of its musicianship. Like the singing, the vocalist on this guy is probably one of the best vocalists I've ever heard just from hearing his singing in this album. He is that good. The guitars are so good. They're fast-paced. They're fun. This was an album where I was like, this could be like one of the best power metal albums ever. If I could get past the same thing that I said about the Angra album, is that there is absolutely no hooks in this album at all. It approaches the album not so much as like, oh yeah, we're gonna make like a fun, like self-contained song. They treat the album as like an ongoing narrative where like each song is trying to kind of tell a story, and it's just going, and then it has, the way it tells it is with power metal, rather than to make a power metal song and use that song to tell a story. So for me, it's kind of flipped of what I like in power metal, because like the songs themselves, like even though they have some repeated parts, they have some, I guess, choruses, they're written more like poetry than they are like a song. So it's very well done and artistic. I just can't get into it. There's absolutely nothing memorable about the song itself. All I remember is, oh yeah, I love the singing and the guitars are good. There's nothing in those songs that make me want to come back to them. So this one really sucks because it's very beautifully done, and I can tell 90% of power metal fans are gonna love this album. For me, who expects and really likes that one element of power metal with just fun hooks, great catchy choruses, probably because I'm a basic bitch, it didn't have that, and so it was very disappointing for me. Moving on, let's get into some non-power metal. Let's talk about the one album that seems to be the universally acclaimed best album of this year, and that is, of course, Take Me Back to Eden by Sleep Token. Now, obviously, when I say universally acclaimed, there's one sphere of power metal, kind of like the mainstream, the Loudwire, the Nick Nocturnal, those types of more mainstream metal people who are like, oh, this is the greatest thing since Metallica's Master of Puppets, and I don't know, I'm exaggerating. And then there's another sphere of metal people who are like, this is the most overrated, boring thing ever. Like, just look at Anthony Fantano's review on it. And I'm more so in that camp. I think I'm a little bit more in the middle because there are songs that I like in this album. Like, if you looked at my favorite songs of the year list, Chokehold I had as an honorable mention. I think that's a pretty solid song. But other than that, not really much. Now, they've got some more like mellow, subdued songs that I also like. The Apparition, Rain, and Take Me Back to Eden, I think, are also solid songs. But this album and this band, like, I just can't tell what it's trying to be. It's doing all of these things. It's like a weird, like, deep groove hook stuff. Like, songs like Vor is almost like a death metal song. And then other songs where it's like, I don't like D, like all of the letters and stuff, and like a couple other songs, it almost feels like it's got some like rap sounds to it where it's like where it sounds like it just beats from a rap song. A lot of it sounds like it's like a metal song, a metal album that is both like catering to more extreme sides of metal, while also trying to cater to like the most mainstream influences of rap and almost pop for a few of these here. And obviously, I'm a hypocrite because I love power metal, and it obviously caters to more mainstream audiences. But the weird thing is, I think power metal, like, unless you're living in Europe, like most mainstream, it's still like a pretty niche subgenre, whereas this feels like it's much more mainstream, and in a bad way. I don't have a problem with mainstream, but I don't know. And then the singing is good, I think, is the best way to describe it. I like it at times, and other times it just sounds kind of cringy. I don't know. There's no real better way to describe my thoughts on this album than saying it's just kind of a clusterfuck of an album. It's trying to be all of these things. It's trying to be deep and to the extremes of metal. It's also trying to be mainstream and weird and quirky and progressive and just doing all of these wacky things, and it ultimately succeeds at none of those things. So, I mean, obviously I'm probably not its target demographic. But I really don't understand why a good bulk of the metal community loves this album so much when it feels like it's not even catering like directly towards like the deeper metal community who would like death metal and black metal and all of those things, when it feels like it's trying to be weird mainstream thing. But I don't know, I'm probably describing it horribly. Tell me in the comments why you like this album if you do. But yeah, let's move on to number 2, or not list, just the next one. I've got The Sinner Rides Again, not Take Me Back to Eden again. The Sinner Rides Again by KK's Priest. This is the one album on this list where I say it's not necessarily a bad album. At least all the other ones, I'd say that's not necessarily a bad album. This one, I think, is most definitely a bad album. And it really kind of bamboozles me why it's actually getting some pretty positive acclaim from different media outlets that I've seen. I think Metal Pilgrim, who I like, his viewers ranked it as like the second best album of the year, which is absolutely mind-boggling because this album is just kind of trash. There's no two ways about it. And obviously, I really love Judas Priest. KK Downing is an excellent guitarist. And for me, I'm in the massive minority that absolutely loves Demolition from Judas Priest. I think Tim the Ripper Owens is actually a very talented, very good singer. So I was excited. I was like, KK Downing, it's classic, traditional heavy metal. We've got Tim the Ripper Owens on vocals, so let's see what you can do. And it was just bad. It was not good. Besides the first one, which is like Sons of the Sentinel, which I thought had some fun stuff in it, the rest of the songs, it was all style and no substance to it whatsoever. I think somebody said before, you can have the best musicianship in a song, but it can still be a bad song. If it's a poorly written song, no amount of great musicianship can save that song. And that's the case for basically this entire album, where you can tell KK Downing like spearheaded writing the lyrics for all of them, because they're just the most boring, lazy lyrics that you could come up with. Like, I love Tim the Ripper Owens, but there's absolutely no good choruses in here. The lyrics are weird and kind of cringy at times. Obviously, the guitar playing, like all of the music and stuff behind that songwriting is pretty good at a lot of parts. But when the songwriting is this bad, there's no amount of great guitar playing can save it. So yeah, The Sinner Rides Again, not too good, really kind of a disappointment. But yeah, moving on, my most disappointing album of the year, and probably, I said I'm not going in order of most disappointing, but this is the one where I say it's the most disappointing, and that is 72 Seasons by Metallica. Now, you're probably wondering, hey, why is this on the list? This is on your favorite albums of the year list. And I would say, yes, it is one of the best albums, at least for me, of the year, but it's also a Metallica album, and in the regards to the expectations that I had for Metallica, it definitely did not live up to them whatsoever. If you've seen my Metallica albums ranked, this is my second least favorite Metallica album. And there's really good stuff on it. I like this album. I think it is a good album. It is just also a disappointing album. It was not as good as it could have or should have been. And there are very easy fixes for it. It's on my top 10 favorite albums of the year because the songs that are so great are really good and elevate this album higher. Songs like 72 Seasons, Lux Eterna, Shadows Follow, Screaming Suicide, all really good songs that feel just like classic Metallica and also going in some fun directions. But a lot of these risks that they take here just fall flat on their face. They try to do all this weird like doom stuff, some progressive stuff. Songs like Inamorata and Crown of Thorns and Chasing Light are just either trying to do something new and failing, or in the case of Inamorata and Chasing Light, just completely boring. This album, if they had made a nice, succinct, just like 8-song album, this could have been a great album, but it just packed full of filler garbage in here that ultimately makes it so that, yeah, there are good songs in this album that I will listen to on its own, but as an album in its entirety, and when you compare it to the rest of Metallica's discography, it is a pretty big letdown, which is too bad because Metallica is one of my favorite bands. It could have and should have been a top 5 album of the year, but it is not, and it's probably shows that Metallica is they're getting old, and it might be near the time to hang it up, at least when it comes to making new material and just focus on their old stuff. But yeah, let me know in the comments, did you like any of these albums that I was disappointed by, and why? What were some other albums that disappointed you this year? Thank you so much for watching. Let me know any other videos that you'd like me to do in the future. Have a great holiday season, and I will see you in the next one.